Welcome back to Best of Birth Worlds. My name is Kayla and I'm your host today. Today we are going to be talking all about prodromal labor. Since today, June 15th is the day that I'm filming this, I went into prodromal labor with my third baby, and so I really wanted to sit down and talk with you guys about this. I posted a video on my social medias about me going into labor, and there were a ton of questions being like, oh, wait a minute, what? I did not know that this was a thing. And so I thought, let's sit down and actually chit chat about what prodromal labor is, and is it common? Are you going to experience it? Maybe, maybe not. Because yes, it is common. It happens in about 30% of labor and deliveries. So you may experience this yourself. Prodromal labor is essentially just labor that stops and starts. It is the stop-start labor. It is false labor. And sometimes you can dilate. I did, unfortunately. But sometimes you can dilate, and it can actually occur anywhere from a few days to a few weeks before you actually give birth. It's not fun. As someone that has gone through it twice now, a lot of people actually don't know that part, because with my second baby, I actually did go through prodromal labor, and nothing really came of it because they were never close together like it was with my third. And so nothing really ever came of that. But a lot of people just don't know that I also went through this with my second baby as well. And yeah, I did go through this twice. It was a very, very hard thing to go through, and I'm just so glad I'm on the other side of it and I never have to go through that again. So I wanted to tell a little bit of my story just to kind of get us going and try and figure out what exactly prodromal labor is, so that way you guys can understand. So with my second pregnancy, I started having regular contractions at 34 weeks. They weren't super regular because I never truly went into the hospital, but they were regular enough that I was timing them, and they were coming about every 8 to 10 minutes, and then they would stop and they would come back, and then they would stop and they would come back. And that happened from 34 weeks till I was 38 weeks and 3 days. The day before I gave birth to my second baby, I was having prodromal labor all day long. It would come and go in hour increments. I would have contractions for an hour. I would be timing my contractions for an hour. In fact, I was cuddling with my daughter that day. She didn't really feel well, and so I was cuddling with her on the couch just watching movies, and I was timing these contractions. Now, I had been timing contractions for 4 weeks, and this day with my daughter was so different. She was actually getting scared of my contractions because I was moaning my way through them. And all day long, they would come every single hour. On the hour, they would come for an hour, go away for an hour, come for an hour, go away for an hour. And that was very, very hard to deal with. It was exhausting. And obviously, eventually I did give birth at 38 weeks, but nothing ever came of that to where they got close enough to where I actually had to go into the hospital. One time they did, and that was actually the first night that it happened. They got almost 5 minutes apart, and then they just stopped altogether. And they would come and go every couple days, and it was really hard. My third labor and delivery, I had prodromal labor at 35 weeks is when it started, so a week later than my second pregnancy. And hers actually did kind of get a little dramatic, essentially. I went into the hospital multiple times for contractions 1 to 2 minutes apart. That's very close together, by the way. That's active labor transition close together. So I went into the hospital the first time at 35 weeks. Actually, I was 34 weeks and 6 days. So that was the first day that I actually had those contractions. My husband had to convince me that I was actually having these contractions and that they were actually getting closer together. I did all the things that they tell you to do. If you're having contractions, sometimes sometimes your uterus is very angry because you're dehydrated. And so I would drink some water. I would drink a cold drink. I would get into the bath. I got into a different position. I was lying down, so I got up and I started walking around. And after about 2 hours of these very consistent contractions, my husband says to me, like, hey, maybe we should go to the hospital. And I was like, no, I'm okay. About 20 minutes later, I was like, I don't think I'm okay. Let's go to the hospital. So we actually had to wake our kids up. We had to take them to the babysitters. Luckily, we had someone on standby that would watch our kids. But yeah, we went to the hospital. I was 3.5 centimeters dilated when I got there. A couple hours later, I was 5 centimeters. And 12 hours after my contractions started, they stopped. And we were sent home a few hours later, and that went on for 3 freaking weeks. I had contractions for 60 hours, not straight, but if you compile all of the times that I actually had contractions over the next 3 weeks, it adds up to 60 hours. Yes, I actually did the math one day. So yes, I added up my contractions and they equaled 60 hours of labor. And that was so extremely hard, because I was emotionally, mentally, physically exhausted by the end of those 3 weeks. So I started having contractions at 35 weeks. I went in again 3 days later to the hospital because I was having back labor, and then that turned into real like stomach labor that wasn't just like contractions in my back. At first I thought that it was actually my scoliosis because I do have scoliosis, so I have back pain literally 24/7. So I actually thought that it was my back pain. So if that doesn't tell you the kind of pain that I deal with on a daily basis from my scoliosis, I actually thought that my contractions were my scoliosis at first. So yeah, I went in a few days later. I think I had contractions that time for like 10 hours straight. It was very hard. Unfortunately, I did have to go into the hospital again, and they checked me. I was still 5 centimeters dilated. A few hours later, I was still 5 centimeters, so they sent me home. If you're not dilating, like, that's really how your baby comes. Like, if you're not dilating, like, there's no reason to keep you, and prodromal labor is not a reason. I have gotten this comment a lot over the past 2 years since I was in prodromal preterm labor. Is I've been like asked so many times, like, why did they not keep you? Why did they send you home at 5 centimeters? And the truth of the matter is, there was nothing that they could do. I just didn't have my baby that day. Unfortunately, prodromal labor doesn't care. It doesn't care. It does not care who you are, what you want. It does not care. And so my contractions stopped each time that I left the hospital. They made sure of that. Like, my contractions stopped. And for hours, the second admission, I believe my contractions had stopped like an hour prior. And I was just like, I just want to go home. I just want to be in my own bed. I want to be in my own bed. I'm tired of being poked and prodded, and I'm tired of these monitors, because when you are in preterm labor, I was preterm. Preterm is anything before 37 weeks. That's also another question that I get of people being like, well, I thought that was okay to give birth at 35 weeks. And no, it's not. Baby's lungs are the last thing to mature. And they don't mature until closer to 37 weeks. And so that's why you are preterm at 35 weeks. You know, I've had people over the past 2 years ask me why they didn't keep me. And the real reason is that they couldn't do anything. They couldn't keep my contractions going because I was preterm. The baby was safer inside than outside. And that's really just it. My baby was safer inside than outside, and at my hospital there is a mandatory 12-hour NICU observation for any 35-weeker. Even if they are okay, they just kind of want to check their saturations and their breathing and their lungs, all that kind of stuff. And I'm really glad that I didn't have my baby, because my baby ended up being about 6 pounds 6 ounces. And if she had been born at 35 weeks, 3 weeks earlier, she would have been close to 4 to 5 pounds. And that is very, very, very little, very little. And a lot of babies that are smaller like that have trouble latching. I wouldn't have had my dream birth. I wouldn't have had my dream with her being on my chest the entire time, you know? Like, I got that golden hour. I got that golden hour. And I am freaking proud of that golden hour, because with my other kids, they were taken away from me. My first baby, she had stuff in her lungs, and so they had to take her away to the warmer to essentially get all of that stuff out of her lungs. And my second baby, he wasn't crying, and so he had to also be taken away. So my third baby was the only baby that wasn't taken away from me, and I'm really happy with how everything turned out. You know, I know a lot of people on the internet are angry with how my birth has turned out, how my labor turned out, and they really want to just blame someone, I guess. But there was no one to blame besides my body. And let me tell you, I've had a talking to with my body about what it put me through. I've even had people be like, oh, that baby better be good. And I don't blame my baby at all. There is not a single thing that she did that caused this. This was my uterus. This is my body, my organ that just caused this. And not a single thing that she did caused this. And so I don't understand the people that say that. And I've got that comment so many times. And that's like one that keeps sticking out to me, is people being like, oh, that baby better be good. But like, I don't blame my child for what my body put me through. I think it's the same thing with my other kids. Like, I would never put my labor onto them. My labor is mine. My labor is mine. The birth is theirs. And that's what I think a lot of people just like don't understand. Anyway, I got off on a little tangent, but prodromal labor is something that happens in about 30% of births. And so this happens a lot. And unless you are 39 weeks and they can augment your labor and keep your labor going, like, your baby is safer inside than outside. Prodromal labor is normal. Prodromal labor is common. And it's not a medical reason, I guess I should say. A lot of people wanted me to be induced or have a C-section. Firstly, a C-section was not what I wanted. A C-section was actually the furthest thing from what I wanted. I wanted an unmedicated labor, and a C-section is quite literally the most medicated labor. So, that was like just the furthest thing from what I wanted, and I'm really glad the way that it worked out. But yeah, people on the internet really, really just want me to have an induction or a C-section, and none of those things are what I wanted or what I could actually have. Because at 35 weeks, they're not just gonna like willy-nilly go give you a C-section. They're not just gonna willy-nilly give you an induction, because they can't legally. They cannot induce you at 35 weeks without a medical reason. And prodromal labor puts you at no risk. There was no risk to me or my baby during that time because my waters were intact. That's also another thing that a lot of people just like don't realize, I guess, is that my waters were intact during these 2 prodromal labors. And so yeah, like, it was the furthest thing from what I wanted or even could have. And so I'm really glad the way that it worked out, even though I was exhausted. I was so exhausted. And I actually did the midwives brew. If you guys want to go look that up, whatever. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I do not condone it. When I was 37 weeks, almost 38 weeks, I took the midwives brew. That's actually what put me into labor the very last time. And a lot of people love to scold me, but going through 3 weeks, almost a month of labor, 60 hours of labor in and out of the hospital, I was exhausted. I hadn't gotten sleep in those 3 weeks, and I was quite literally just wanting it to be over. I just wanted it to be over. And because I was in 39 weeks, they couldn't induce me. And so they wouldn't even give me a membrane sweep. I remember the very last admission that I had before the actual admission where I had my baby. I went in, had contractions for 8 hours, and then they stopped. They sent me home, and the very next day I called up my midwife and I said, hey, would you guys give me a membrane sweep? They said, we cannot do that until 39 weeks. And I sobbed. I got off that call and I just sobbed. I was so exhausted, mentally, physically, emotionally. And I think a lot of people don't really realize like how much that can take a toll on you. I was just so tired. I was so worn out. I was worn. I was all the things that you could even possibly think of. I was. And that was very hard for me because I didn't want to go through it anymore. I was done. I was so done. There's so many nights where I would just cry myself to sleep. In fact, there were multiple nights where I would stay up timing my contractions from like midnight to 4 a.m. And it was rough. It was really, really rough. And I didn't go into the hospital because I knew that like these are just going to stop. They're just going to send me home. I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to bother the nurses. I don't want to bother my midwife. I just didn't want to go in. Take it from me. Go in if you are having contractions. It is better to be safe than sorry because a lot of things can happen. I'm just really lucky that like nothing did happen. But yeah, I was having so much labor. I was tired. And so, I think that's like the aspect that not a lot of people really talk about with prodromal labor is like the mental aspect of it. Mentally, I was not doing well. I was not doing well. I was not a well human being at that time, and that was very hard for me because I was like, I wanted this baby, even though she was unplanned. Like, I wanted that baby, and like, it was just such a hard pregnancy, and I just wanted it to be over. I didn't want to do it anymore. So that's essentially what happened. But yeah, prodromal labor is very, very common, and it happens about 30% of pregnancies, and it's unfortunate, but it's essentially just your body's way of gearing up for actual labor. I actually kind of thank it in a way because it actually got me halfway there. I wasn't a 0 going to 10 through my entire actual labor. My unmedicated labor, if I had gone through those 60 hours in one single day, or multiple days technically, but like, you know what I mean. If I had done that in one single sitting, I would not have gone unmedicated. I could tell you that 100% for a fact right now. My actual labor did end up being 4.5 hours long, and I'm so grateful for that, but also like that was also hard because I did dilate quickly. I actually have my entire birth in my second episode of this podcast, so you guys can go back and like listen to all 3 of my births, and I even tell my prodromal labor story, at least my last one, in there. So anyway, that is kind of all that prodromal labor is, and this is kind of where I wanted to leave you guys with this podcast today. I think prodromal labor is truly the worst thing ever, but it does happen, and I wish that more people knew about it, because me sharing about it online, people are like, wait a minute, this can happen. Or wait a minute, like, why are you not being induced? Why are you not having a C-section? And I wish people knew that, like, there's no risk, unless your water is broken, of course. But there's no risk, like, with just prodromal labor, because it is what it is. But if you are having prodromal labor, and if you are preterm especially, go into the hospital. If your contractions are 5 minutes apart, go into the hospital and get hooked up and check on your baby. You know, sometimes when you are preterm and those contractions, your baby cannot like handle them very well because your baby is so tiny. And so go into the hospital. I don't ever regret going into the hospital. That is actually probably one of the best things that I actually did, because I was able to be monitored. I was able to get the steroid shots for the baby's lungs. I was able to get medication that stops your labor. So yeah, that's what I was able to do. And if you are having these kinds of contractions and you are preterm especially, go into the hospital. I promise you are not bugging the nurses. They are there for a reason. They are there to serve you. Go over to my Instagram stories and leave any of your questions over there. I will leave a little question box every single time I post one of these episodes. If you guys have any questions, leave them over there. But I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast episode, and I hope you learned a little bit of something. If you did have prodromal labor, go over to my Instagram and let me know. If you would mind telling me like your story, I would love to hear your stories. Truly, I made this podcast to hear all of your guys' stories, and I have received so many amazing DMs and comments, and I'm just like so entirely grateful for you guys. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast episode. This is the Best of Birth Worlds. My name is Kayla, and I am your laborhood doula at your cervix. Bye, guys.